The galactic conservatory floated like a glass jewel in the void, an arcology of beauty and curiosity. Thousands of species had contributed to its construction, each proud to display their native fauna, flora, and occasionally themselves. But one exhibit was always quiet. The observation deck outside Habitat 19 remained mostly empty, except for the armed guards stationed 24 hours a cycle. Inside was a single occupant, listed on the manifest as Homo sapiens, level red containment. No one spoke of it openly. The few researchers assigned to the subject worked behind sealed doors and signed silence oaths stronger than imperial treaties. The alien public was only told that the being inside was dangerous, uncooperative, and under strict non-contact protocols. That was the official reason. The real reason was fear. Fear had no translation in the languages of the Trivan, who built their society on communal memory. It had no direct analog among the Caraxi, whose hive minds processed emotional stimuli as logic. Yet every species who studied the human reached the same unquantifiable conclusion. Something was wrong with it. The human didn't speak. Not once in the 4 standard years since it had been discovered wandering the surface of a dead planet, surrounded by the ruins of a city that predated any known colony. It ate when food was provided but never acknowledged its captors. It stared into the walls as though they whispered back. Its heartbeat, brain activity, and metabolic rhythm deviated from all known baselines. The only constant was its unpredictability. Dr. Vosthilin, a biolinguist with 27 cycles of research under his fronds, tried to map its behavior patterns. He failed. One day the human exercised for hours, moving with a precision that reminded the Lin of war drones. The next, it sat motionless for an entire solar cycle, its pupils dilated as if watching something behind the veil of reality. The Lin wrote over 900 pages of analysis. None of them offered answers. Then, a drone exploded. It was a Class 4 recon model, programmed to maintain distance and record silently. Midway through a routine pass, it convulsed in midair and dropped to the ground in a bubbling heap. Internal sensors showed that its processors had overheated in 0.0004 seconds, its core turning into slag. No malfunction could explain it. The footage showed only the human lifting its head and staring at the device. 2 cycles later, technician Ilos from maintenance vanished. He had entered the secondary control corridor to replace a damaged panel. His last recorded words, "Zone 19 systems check green, initiating reset." That was 22 days ago. No trace had been found. His tools were still there. His transponder was silent. The head of security, a centipedal entity from the Cost Dominion, recommended tranquilizing the subject and relocating it to a suspended stasis chamber. The recommendation was denied. The AI Administrative Core reviewed the data and concluded that containment protocols had not yet been breached. The human had done nothing provable. The disappearances, equipment failures, and rising electromagnetic distortions could all be coincidental. The staff began calling it the anomaly. Public access was restricted further. Now, only a skeleton team was authorized to monitor the anomaly, and all observation was routed through third-tier relay systems. Direct neural links were banned after an unfortunate incident involving a Trivan intern who attempted a Psilink. Her mind collapsed into recursive thought spirals, and she died screaming a word that had no meaning in any known language. Her final message, "It knows." A mythos emerged, despite all attempts to suppress it. Whispers among the cleaning staff, rumors in the mess halls. Some said the anomaly moved differently when unobserved, that it walked through the walls. Others claimed it had rewritten the biometric locks on its cage, yet chose not to leave. Why? What did it want? One young xenologist suggested the anomaly wasn't a prisoner. It was studying them. He was transferred off-station within the day. Every test failed. They tried to introduce calming pheromones, psychological triggers, even images of other humans, fabricated composites from old archives. The anomaly ignored them all. It seemed to exist on its own terms, inside a bubble of reality that bent everything around it. The leading theory, unspoken but collectively held, was that the creature had somehow adapted to perceive time, gravity, or consciousness differently. Maybe its silence wasn't a refusal. Maybe it was communicating in a way no one could yet grasp. That theory gained weight when the gravitational sensors near Zone 19 began recording minor fluctuations. Micro-lensing events, small enough to be dismissed, but regular enough to form patterns. Black hole physics in a cage? Impossible. Unless the human wasn't what it seemed. Then the lights began flickering. Not the entire station. Just the sectors within a 2-kilometer radius of the anomaly's containment. Backup systems kicked in, but some sectors experienced full blackout. When they came back online, screens played footage that had not been recorded. Personal images. Nightmares. Faces long dead. 2 officers resigned. One attempted to take his own life. He failed. His final statement, "It showed me my future." The station's director convened a crisis council. 12 members, all of them experienced, intelligent, and utterly terrified. They discussed termination options. None were viable. Directed energy weapons couldn't penetrate the reinforced habitat. Bioagents had no effect. The habitat itself was now beginning to resist scans. It seemed to be learning. Or more accurately, the anomaly was changing it. One of the younger members, a cold-blooded strategist from the Polari Corps, asked a single question. What if the human isn't hostile? What if this is a warning, not a threat? The room went silent. Then someone asked the real question. A warning for what? They dug deeper. Archived logs. Scraps of human history decoded from interstellar probes. Some fragments were poetic, others brutal. All painted a picture of a species that refused to die, refused to submit, and viewed limits as invitations. A line stood out from an old Earth broadcast. We do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. That line chilled even the most stoic alien minds. After 4 years of silence, the anomaly spoke. It didn't scream, or roar, or whisper. It simply said, in the ancient human tongue, "Hello." All systems across the sector froze. Not just the conservatory. All stations, all satellites, all ships within 30 light-years. One word had carried through encrypted channels, breached firewalls, and echoed inside devices that weren't even connected. Then it smiled. It stood and walked to the center of its enclosure, looked into the camera, and placed its hand on the glass. Every sensor shorted out. Power was restored 12 minutes later. When they reviewed the footage, the human was back in its corner, seated, still, silent. But something had changed. The fear was no longer just from the anomaly. It was spreading. Visitors were requesting transfers. Staff began quitting. Scientists refused to approach Zone 19. It wasn't just dangerous. It was contagious. The galaxy had stored the last human in a zoo. It had caged it, observed it, and thought itself safe. But now they realized the mistake. They hadn't trapped the last human. They had invited it in. The aftermath of the human's first word rippled through the upper echelons of the Galactic Conservatory like a pressure wave through a deep ocean. The reaction wasn't uniform panic. Something worse had taken root. Doubt. And doubt was the one thing the elite minds of the galaxy were never trained to manage. An emergency review committee was established under Protocol Theta Prime, usually reserved for planetary extinction scenarios. Delegates from 57 species arrived in secrecy. Their conclusion was unanimous. The anomaly was no longer a passive specimen. It had initiated contact, breached containment without moving a muscle, and destabilized systems thought immutable. That wasn't an anomaly. That was a hostile variable in a controlled environment. Still, a plan was proposed, not to eliminate but to understand. Before they could decide to destroy the last human, they needed to understand what it was. High conduit fall of the Anthraci suggested a multi-tiered containment overlay, physical, temporal, and cognitive. They would surround the human with layers of perception filters, chronodampeners, and thought diversion loops. When the engineers began installation, they discovered that several of the necessary mechanisms were already non-functional. Not from damage or decay. They had been turned off from within, despite no interface existing to do so. Each device had its access log erased. Not corrupted.
Erased.
A technician from the Meraki matriarchy discovered her own biometric signature, initiating the shutdown. She had never even been on that level of the station. Attempts to reconfigure the zone were abandoned after 6 personnel experienced auditory hallucinations, and 1 collapsed into a catatonic state after hearing a child's voice repeating the word, again. The psychologist assigned to debrief them refused to speak of the sessions. She transferred to a deep space isolation post within days. Then came the pulse. It wasn't detected by machines. Only the living noticed. A moment of stillness. A silence that sank into bones, paused hearts, slowed reflexes. Witnesses across the conservatory claimed to have seen their own reflections look back with foreign expressions. Some species, incapable of human mimicry, nonetheless described faces they couldn't possibly make, eyes narrowed in judgment, smiles that weren't smiles at all. Reports surfaced of impossible events. 2 personnel found themselves locked inside their quarters for 9 hours, though logs showed their doors never closed. A cleaning drone tasked with decontaminating the outer ring returned with footage of a landscape no one recognized, barren plains under a dead red sun, with black monoliths jutting from the earth. The stars in the sky didn't match any known system. The footage was deleted. The drone was dismantled. The question resurfaced again and again in private messages and encrypted files. Was the human alone? Biological scans indicated only 1 life form in Zone 19. Yet readings began to fluctuate. Sometimes the human's mass increased slightly, as though another presence occupied the same space for a brief moment. Sometimes its body temperature dropped to 0 without adverse effects. Medical experts couldn't explain it. Quantum theorists offered theories involving overlapping timelines or splintered consciousness. But the implications were too terrifying. One researcher proposed that the last human was a node, a nexus connecting to something vast, hidden outside detectable reality. Not a specimen, but an anchor. That paper never saw daylight. The author deleted it and resigned, muttering that it was already too late. 3 days later, another message came. We remember. This time, it appeared simultaneously on physical walls, in digital archives, in the minds of sleeping crew, and as carved etchings in the walls of species that never developed writing. The message was translated instantly in every language, including dead tongues long erased from galactic history. The senior archivist of the Scarn Collective suffered a neural rupture reading it. Her final recorded expression was a mix of awe and terror, emotions Scarn were not known to exhibit. The station's AI began requesting clarification from its creators, an act it had never performed before. When asked why, it answered. It asked me a question. The AI could not recall what the question was. A pattern analyst from the Vault of Echoes compiled all known outputs since the human's first word. She discovered that the fluctuations in system integrity and background noise formed a musical scale. The same scale appeared in ancient human songs recovered from derelict probes. But when played, the notes induced vertigo and emotional instability in non-human listeners. The analyst continued her work for 5 more days before vanishing. Her last message: it's not just speaking, it's singing. Security lockdowns were implemented. The conservatory was sealed. No traffic in or out. All personnel required psychological screenings every 8 hours. Most of the findings were inconclusive. One species, the Nrel, natural empaths, simply stopped functioning. Their neural networks collapsed in unison. Their last recorded group thought, "It hurts to feel it." The anomaly was now affecting memory. Several staff members reported false recollections, memories of lives they never lived, families they never had, wars they'd never fought. The memories were detailed, sensory, personal. Some even showed familiarity with Earth, its history, its pain, its triumphs. The humans still said nothing more. But now, when observed, it appeared closer than it was. Optical distortions made it seem larger, taller, older. For some, it appeared as a child.
For others, an old man.
One officer screamed that it had worn her own face. The zone around Habitat 19 became unstable. Gravity fluxed in irregular waves. Time dilation effects caused some systems to loop or skip seconds. Maintenance crews refused to enter. Instead, robots were sent. They returned non-functional, their data scrambled with human language quotes. One repeated, "I am the last, but not alone." External agencies got involved. The Galactic Council demanded the anomaly be neutralized or relocated. But every attempt to move it failed. Physical efforts ended with melted equipment. Energetic approaches redirected back on the attackers. One projectile was found embedded in the chamber wall before it had even been launched.
It knew.
It anticipated. It remembered. A universal recall of all documents involving Earth was ordered. The attempt was pointless. The human had already seeded the information across thousands of systems. Old myths returned. Some civilizations reinterpreted their origin legends. In a sector once colonized by the Orlanth, the locals found murals under ancient soil, depictions of tall, two-eyed beings with fire in their hands. They started calling the human a god. Others called it a plague, a remnant of chaos, a wound in time. None could agree. None could approach. Then, finally, the human moved. It stood and walked to the edge of its enclosure and spoke again. "You forgot us." This time, the voice didn't carry through systems. It came directly into minds. Billions across the sector heard it in their native language. Some fell to their knees. Some screamed. Some began speaking human languages they never learned. The conservatory's power grid shut down completely. Every backup failed. Darkness fell, and the only light was the soft blue glow from the anomaly's containment cell. No one went in. No one needed to.